Welcome back to Firestorm Games, and in this video we'll be celebrating the release of the new Broken Realm Morathi book to bring you another how to quickly paint guide. This time I'll be showing you a speedy way of painting snake scales, something that you'll be able to put to good use on both your Melusai and Morathi miniatures. After assembly, the first and probably most important step in painting is to prime, and that's so that the later layers of paint can properly adhere to the surface of the model. As you can see, I've chosen to use a black primer for this task, due to the fact that it will be acting as the shading that will be built upon in the next step. The primer you choose is up to you, as many different brands and methods of application are available, and it's just whatever you have to hand. After priming, the first step was to apply some lighter paint. This was because I was going to be applying a lot of contrast paints in this guide, which all required a lighter coloured base in which to do their magic. To apply this paint in a way that will retain shading, whilst also allowing me to quickly apply it, I used a technique called dry brushing. Dry brushing requires taking a large and preferably rounded brush like this one here, dipping it into your paint, and then the brush can be wiped onto a piece of paper, towel or tissue. This removes any excess paint and helps to work the paint through those bristles. Now that the brush is prepped, you can start to apply some downward quick strokes to the surface of the model. Now, by only applying a light amount of pressure here, I found that the paint accumulates onto the large flat surfaces but not into the recessed areas. Because of the primer I used, these areas remain black and so would appear as shadows, which helps to bring out the level of detail without the need for washes. At this stage I had a good basis for the model's shading, but I was lacking any colour. This would be remedied by applying a series of contrast paints, which created the missing colour whilst maintaining the shading effects created by the dry brushing. The first of these paints to apply was Fyreslayer Flesh. This was applied straight from the pot and over the underbelly of the snake's skin. As I was applying this paint, I paid close attention to not let it pool too much in any one location and tried to apply it as evenly as I possibly could. Moving from the underbelly towards the spine, I then moved to the deep red of Flesh Tearer's red. This paint was applied in the exact same manner as before, however this time I only painted the first two bands of scales that sat next to the segments we painted in the first step. To create a gradient towards the spinal scales, which I intended to paint black, I chose to paint the remaining line of scales with a dark Shyish Purple. For the scales that run along the spine, as well as the spike at the end of the tail, I applied a layer of black Templar. As with the other contrast paints, this will stain the surface of the scales with a very dark grey coloration, which will help to create some contrast against the black paint that remained in those recesses. At this stage, the scales had their colour and a degree of shading. As such, they could be used as they currently were for a quick but effective result. However, using only the paints I already used, I was able to add a little more depth to the model's detail. This was done by mixing the contrast paints with some Wraithbone paint. The result was a paint that matched the hue of the contrast paint that was mixed into it. This meant that I could use this to highlight the edges of the model. By painting fine lines of this lighter paint over the model, I helped to create and enhance how much these details stood out. I followed the same order of application for these highlights as I did when I painted on the contrast, starting off with my mixture of Fyreslayer and Wraithbone, which I applied over the segmented underbelly. Following the same mixture of Wraithbone and contrast paint, I next used some Flesh Tearer's red to highlight the red scales. The purple scales were then followed, using a mixture of Shyish Purple and Wraithbone. Finally, Black Templar and Wraithbone were mixed to create a very light grey paint. This was used to highlight both the spinal scales and also the spike at the tip of the tail. And here we have the finished Melusai scales, which can be painted exceptionally quickly with good results. This time can be easily shaved down even further if you were to paint several models simultaneously in a batch. Now, whilst this guide focused on just the Melusai, you could also apply the exact same techniques to Morathi or any other miniatures which feature snake-like scales. If you enjoyed this guide to getting your miniatures painted and ready for gaming in as little time as possible, then please do let us know in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions for future tutorials, then let us know those as well. You can find this kit and all of the paints used in this video on the Firestorm Games web store for at least 10% off the RRP, and you can find a link to the site in the description below. And so we just want to finish off by saying a big thank you for watching this video, and we hope to see you again on Firestorm Games.